with Nikki on Valley Marcom. And we are really excited to have our panelists here today. We have Anna Kinney from the University of North Dakota. She leads the University Writing Program. We have Sue Haas, who is the marketing manager of A2S engineering firm here in Grand Forks and has offices across, 20 offices now. And we have Chris Dunnigan, who is the technology director here at A2S as well. And so what I'll do is I will kick this off by just having the panelists maybe give a little more detail about what you do in your current role and how you are currently using AI or how your organization is currently using AI. And I'll start with Sue. Why don't you go ahead? You're at the top of my screen. You're on mute.
I swear I unmuted myself, but whatever. Thanks, Andrea. Like Andrea said, I am the marketing manager here at A2S. I've been here for about 17 years, actually 18. I just had my anniversary. So, and I worked at an advertising agency before that, but I've always had kind of a love of tech. And so when AI started to spring up, this was just too good to pass up. And obviously we needed to keep ahead of it. So we've used AI quite a bit already, especially in the marketing department here at AE2S. I work a lot on proposals, and so I've used it not so much to draft stuff, because I find that if you just give say ChatGPT a blank slate, you're going to get not a lot of great results. But if you draft something and ask it to improve it, you get some really cool stuff. So I've used that a lot for that. We've also used it for, a lot of different things like brainstorming, coming up with titles, improving abstract stuff like that, but also some stuff that you might not think of, like finding some functions for Excel when you need to compile some stats and stuff like that. Another helpful thing that I've found is a lot of times I have to take resumes from sub-consultants and make them be consistent format with our own resumes, and the copy itself, not necessarily just the formatting. And so you can plug something like that into ChatGPT and have it do all the busy work for you, so you can concentrate on the stuff that matters the most. So we've been using AI for a lot of the copy stuff. We've touched a little bit on the image creation, but haven't really found anything that's super applicable yet, but we continue to keep searching. So those are just a few things that we're using it for so far.
Great, thanks, Sue. Anna, do you want to jump in and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're using AI for?
Sure, yeah. I run the university writing program at UND. So I'm coming at this from a slightly different direction. But I've been my unit is also part of the Teaching Transformation and Development Academy. And there I support faculty development around important academic issues, which this is. So since December of last year, this has been one of my big priorities at work, is helping faculty think about this, helping students think about this, help the institution think about it broadly. I ran some faculty development workshop in May, an intensive week-long one to help faculty think about assignments in a world of AI that don't necessarily use AI, but are being considerate of the fact that whether your students are using it, they are to produce materials, they are certainly consuming materials that have been made by it. So there's multiple sides of this. We think a lot about the ethical issues and the privacy issues, the issues of consent and data and all of those kind of things. From a writing standpoint, the way I've been approaching all of this is that our purpose as a writer is to connect with a reader always. It is to connect authentically and effectively with an audience. And I think that dovetails really nicely with the work that all of you do. I think the core tenet of marketing, of course, is closing the gap between you and the target audience, whoever it is you're trying to reach, and doing that ethically and effectively. So those are kind of what I'm bringing to this. I'm going to drop into the chat for those of you that are online, just a link to UND Commons. This is through our library. This is an assignment repository, an assignment library. These are products that faculty have created that are engaging their students either in conversations around AI or the information literacy environment that AI presents them, right? How to be critical consumers of this, how to be really thoughtful. Hopefully that will give you all some ideas of what conversations at UND in different disciplines look like, because our approach at UND is recognizing this looks very different for different fields. Some fields have really adopted it, and others, it is not part of their ethical code. In fact, it stands in opposition to their ethical code. So a one size fits all doesn't work with AI.
Thank you, Anna. Chris?
Chris Dunnigan, thank you for the invite and appreciate the chance to be here. I've been with AE2S since mid-July. Before that, I've been in the financial services for about 12 years. And with this role, I've kind of gotten to be very much just kind of immersed in all facets of what AI could be and what it might mean for us from business, because I'm kind of learning a new industry from the ground up. So it was as good as anything to be with. I've obviously spent more time on the technical side, and given my target audience, I'll try to keep that part of my personality in check a little bit. So we're going to, look at different things. And for us,
You're muted, Andrea.
You're muted, Andrea.
Is anybody else getting a weird audio from Chris?
Yes.
Okay. Chris, it's very
Crackly.
Yeah. Like something's almost over a mic or something.
all right.
Or brushing up against a mic.
If only you knew some IT guys.
So Chris, maybe you're on mute. You automatically went on mute. So maybe just so you know that as you start talking again.
Okay, is that better?
Tons. Perfect.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, good segue into being the technology guy. This is kind of the reality that the pandemic taught us. But quasi starting over, we been with AE2S for the last 4 months, give or take, and learning a new industry. Kind of had a reason I'm in part of our AI task force. So I've really kind of been into all facets of that, like a little bit of what everybody is talking about, as well as the underlying security, questions and functionality. And when I was kind of running through the questions we got, I thought it was really interesting because, work and home life and all that stuff kind of bleeds together. And for me, I look at this as kind of one and the same. It's technology is going to continue to make, blur those lines and that. And like just even today, I've used Alexa, Siri, Spotify, and Outlook. And that's kind of been my AI footprint up till noon-ish, give or take. So very tactically in the technology world, I use it pretty heavily for launch points for things like policies, procedures, job descriptions, things of that nature. It's very adept at giving you a very workable first draft. And then on the personal side, I use it like for learning quite a bit. It's very adept at writing code. It's adept at a lot of these things. So anybody that's not using it to kind of give themselves a leg up and that type of thing, I think is going to be a little behind the 8 ball. And so that's kind of where I'm looking at, kind of straddling both sides of it, saying, hey, here's the business, here's the personal, but ultimately the skills will let you hop between both and make you more productive in both areas.
And Chris, you mentioned the AI task force. And I think maybe that leads into that next question. And Anna, you touched on this too, but how is your organization preparing for adopting AI or preparing for rules around AI? If you want to talk about the task force and maybe provide the listeners with kind of the step-by-step of how you approached this thing of AI, right? It's so many things, but what was the first steps?
Is that for me, Andrea?
You or Sue?
Let's go with Sue and I will back her up.
And I will actually unmute myself this time. Well, I guess one of the first things that we did is we started getting plugged into the channel of hearing about what's happening and what's going on. And I think we were pretty early on in the process, and we realized that we needed some guidelines for the company because, well, a lot of the company hadn't heard about AI. There were just as many people who were actually already using it. And so making sure, Anna, you talked about the ethical responsibilities, making sure that we weren't putting things out there that were putting us at risk, and just, responsibly using that, as well as letting people know when you were using it so that we could find the best of the best and replicate that throughout the rest of the firm. And as that was coming along too, we also decided to form this AI committee because obviously it is a game changer, and we needed to not just be siloed in our approach to it and consider beyond just the marketing aspects, the different ways that it will impact us as engineers. Obviously, there's potential for it to actually do engineering work, and there's risks that come with that. So it was a bigger issue than just a few of us tackling it, and we saw the need for that task force. Chris joined about that time when we had already created the task force, and he was brought on board. Andrew and myself are both members of that. We also have our chief legal officer as well, and who am I forgetting?
CFO.
Yes, our CFO as well, to kind of give the financial perspective as well. So we haven't been meeting too regularly, but together we've been keeping each other informed of different updates that have been happening in AI. We've been sharing webinars and stuff like that. And one of the nice things is we've kind of found some of the presenters who we feel are pretty effective and have followed them, as well as their articles on LinkedIn and stuff like that too. So it's an ever evolving process for us. And as everyone is, we're learning and adapting and growing, but that's kind of how we're taking those first steps.
Yeah, and I think too, I would add on to that is we understood the ramifications and issues that could come from it. And like Sue said, we did put a policy around it and parameters around it. And we also had a lunch and learn immediately to say, we are putting parameters around this. Here's where you can find the information. Anna, you had spoke about really starting that process as well. How did you start the process of putting some parameters around it or putting policy together, if you have?
Yeah, so I am not in a policy creation program or like position at the university, but I do get to work with those folks. So I will say that writing studies, of which that's where my degrees are, is studying how writing works, and it's a whole field of expertise. And they've been dealing with digital writing and technology tools for writing since the late 60s, early chatbot models like Eliza, if you're familiar with those. So this is something that we have significant roots in writing programs and thinking about. So it's been a topic of conversation for us pretty significantly since 2020, when GPT-3 and different things were absolutely out there. They were just less accessible to the general public because of the interface being kind of slightly higher set of skills needed to access it, right? And so we started these conversations. The writing program had a lot to offer to those conversations and thinking about what this means. So from our standpoint, UND, actually the entire North Dakota University system has an AI forum. It's led by President Armacost. Of course, our president and chancellor have a background in this type of work. They have backgrounds in technology and in automated systems and different things like that. So they're bringing a lot of expertise as well to lead these conversations. Working with faculty is wonderful. Can also be really challenging, right? There are faculty who are very ingrained in their practice and their fields and what that all looks like. And because there are such different ways of understanding this, it meant bringing a lot of people to the table and getting a lot of people up to speed. So I've been primarily approaching policy conversations as educational ones and listening sessions. What is important to the field? What are professional networks saying? So for example, the NIH right now has a policy that you cannot use AI for proposals and you cannot use AI for peer review. The information cannot be put into those systems because it's pre-published, right? We don't know what happens with it. There's a lot of concerns around it. So right now there's a blanket statement coming from the NIH that it's a do not use. There are other fields where it's used with attribution, right? And so bringing all of those different voices and perspectives to the table has helped inform policy that comes from folks that are in policy creation positions. And like I said, right now, UND's policy is more guidance. But it does start with, just to bounce off what Sue said, that attribution and transparency of how we're using it. We're in a position of learning together. And so concealing how we use it, not being transparent or open about how we're using it is actually ultimately going to be a setback. There are ethical issues around attribution and transparency, right? In academia, citing your sources and being clear about the tools used is an important tenet to how we work. But there's also issues about bringing people into the conversation to both eliminate fear around this, to encourage understanding of where these tools are most helpful and less helpful, and seeing kind of good use cases and bad use cases. I think in academia, actually, I think everywhere, what we see in the media right now is an understanding of tech and I'm borrowing from Runa Benjamin, who's a sociologist here, but she talks about techno-futurism, and that almost exclusively our understanding about a tech future is based in either tech dystopia or tech utopia, right? The technology is going to kill us, it's going to take our jobs, it's going to destroy the world, or it's going to save us, right? It's going to liberate us. It's going to make an even playing field. And we're finally going to be able to do all the things we want to do. And the reality is neither of those, right? Utopia, dystopia are based in the idea that they don't exist, but rather they represent our greatest fears and hopes. And so I think a lot of our conversation has been transparency in order to find out, how do we move away from dystopia and utopia and look at where we are right now and what we've got and how can that lead us? I think we've also been transparent around that this will ultimately continue to change and that people need to develop a sense of kind of openness, curiosity, and flexibility as we continue to learn and as the tools develop.
Thank you, Anna. It's kind of funny you say that because I just watched Mission Impossible. I think it's 5. It's the latest one, but it's all about the entity taking over. And so it was kind of timely to watch that. I'm interested in, I know, Anna, for you at the university, it really depends on where you're at and how you use it, but interested in you personally, do you use ChatGPT or do you use Bing Chat or some of the other things? What do you use them personally, or how do you use them?
Yeah, so it's a very good question, and I'll answer in kind of 2 brackets. So I've used probably hundreds, honestly, of AI. Every time I have a question or I have an idea, I plug it in because I have to learn so that I can help guide faculty the best that I can and guide students through this practice. So I think I exported my ChatGPT not long ago, and I had something like 1,200 pages of chat. I mean, it's consistent. I do not use any AI for any writing I do. That's a line for me. And the reason being is my audience and my role on campus. I am a writing across the curriculum, writing center leader. And so for me, voice and the humanity of my work is very important. I'm solidly in the camp that human readers deserve human writers and human writers deserve human readers. I think that who knows how that will change. I'm totally open to it. I'm still playing with all of it. But I do worry about what message we send when something isn't worth the time to write it, and yet we expect somebody to read it. And I know in my conversations with people that they feel that way too. Like, if you can't bother to write this, why in the world should I read it? And I think that that's something we have to grapple with, right? How we put our time, how we make sure that we're not disrupting or abusing that relationship that we have between communicator and the person we're communicating. And I think it can absolutely happen with a tech interface, so I'm not against that. I train writing consultants, which are students who support their fellow writers, right? They provide feedback, they sit down, and we've used it for case studies, right? Produce a piece of writing that has these features. And that way it provides opportunities for students to critique without using student work as the thing that they're looking at, right? So it's this neutral piece that we can look at. So I've created a lot of sample documents that we can critique what's working well, what's not working well. How do we write different prompts? How can you push? I made a comic book back in January. I've always wanted to, and I don't have the drawing skills. So I played around in Midjourney and Stable Diffusion, created these bunch of images, and then used ChatGPT to do different things, right? So we've played a lot with it, but where I stand right now is anything going out, especially from my professional capacity, is mine at this point.
Thank you for that perspective. Sue, I know that we use it quite a bit. Can you explain a little more about what we use and how we use it?
Well, yes, sorry. There's a couple different paths that we use right now. It is embedded into a lot of the programs that we already use, and I think we're going to continue to see more and more of that trend rather than going to these one-off programs. And I did have a couple examples to share with everyone too, so I'll just go ahead and share my screen here if I can. Ooh, that's not the right. Okay. So, and you'll have to forgive me if you guys are all already using this and stuff, but this is a real life example of, we got this image for a proposal cover, and the composition just wasn't that great. And so we needed to do something, without totally altering the image. One of the nice things about having AI embedded in Photoshop now is that we can go ahead and expand the screen. So I'm just going to go and try and zoom out here if I can get for some reason my zoom tool is not working. So let's just go ahead and try and zoom out here. You'll get to see my ineptitude here. So I'm just going to go ahead and change the canvas size here to something larger. And so when I'm doing this, I find that it helps to grab just a little part of the image itself. It helps, for some reason, it do a better job of generating the missing information. And so I'll just go ahead and select all of that. And then once I've done that, I can just hit on generative fill. And I don't even need to enter any prompt. I just click on generate. And thankfully it's going pretty quickly, but isn't that an amazing result? I was just blown away. And you actually do get 3 different variations And it did a fairly good job of even rebuilding that missing part of the sign. So, we're not really trying to alter reality. We're just trying to expand the photo that we should have taken a little bit better in the first place. And, we've had some of this AI technology already embedded into Photoshop for years with like auto content generator, and I can't remember the exact name of it, but if you're familiar with Photoshop, you're aware of it. So it's nice that they added these expanded capabilities. It's really helped out in a lot of the ways that I use it. Another thing that we do is sometimes help us draft, and we always treat everything that comes out of AI as a first draft. We never ever just throw it out there, because one, it's not necessarily factual. It doesn't necessarily agree with what we actually, what we're going for. And sometimes AI just has hallucinations. So you have to read through everything. You have to change it to be what it needs to be. So just as an example, one of the things that we're looking to do is draft a policy, basically a release form for people that we use in our perspectives campaign, which is photo and video of our engineers talking about the unique perspective that A2S brings to our clients. And so because I didn't want to share my horrible typing skills in front of the entire crowd, I pre-wrote this, and just knowing how to write a good prompt is really important. And you can even ask Chat GPT how to write a good prompt, but I like to give it a lot of background information. So A2S is a 350-person water and wastewater engineering firm. We're currently running a prospectus marketing campaign featuring photos and videos of our employees and talking about the unique perspective they bring to, they and A2S bring to clients. Please help me draft a release form granting A2S permission to use the employees' photos and videos. And we could have gone further and said, this is the tone of voice we want you to use. Pretend you're a policy drafter or whatever. There's tons of interesting ways to change your prompts. And so I did run this one earlier just to make sure that the prompt was okay to, but it does actually a pretty good job of starting with the first draft. But there's certain things right away that I see that I would change, like an irrevocable right to use their photograph. I would never put that out to our employees, because no one would ever sign that. But it is a great first draft to start from. But the one thing you always need to remember too is that you can go ahead and revise that prompt, go ahead and refine the results that you're getting. So if I wanted to say, please make this less irrevocable and stuff like that, you could go and further refine that. So I'm going to stop sharing right now, because those were the two that I wanted to touch on. But other ones that we use a lot too are CoSchedule, our social media scheduling tool, actually has tools to help you start with a draft or improve the copy of your post. Illustrator now has some great abilities. Premiere Pro actually has where it'll do the transcript for you automatically and take you right to the spot, to the certain word that you want to go to. So that's pretty powerful as well. As for standalone, we use Chat GPT quite a bit. A few of us in the firm do have the professional version, which is nice because it does have Dolly built in too, so you can do some of the image generation from that. Another thing that's a big concern for us too, though, is the security of our data. Obviously, we don't want to get some of our clients' information, out to just a general Chat GPT. So we did invest in copy.ai. And that is nice because everything stays private. You're not teaching an AI that's then going to go and help someone else write something. The other thing with that one is you can actually enter in a brand voice. You can have it learn from samples of your writing. And unfortunately, I don't have a good example to show with you because we're still learning that program and we haven't gotten to a spot where we've gotten really reliable results. And then the other one that I'm really excited about that we haven't implemented, but it's coming soon, is Microsoft Copilot, which is going to be an AI on top of all of the Microsoft programs. What I'm excited about is how that could help us, find those documents that you spend, 15 minutes searching for on a regular basis. I feel like there's a lot of time savings, a lot of possibility there.
And I think you touched on, so many of us use Microsoft products that Copilot really seems like a very powerful AI application on top of our Microsoft things. Chris, do you want to take a couple minutes and talk about the positives and if there is negatives of Microsoft Copilot and how it works?
Yeah, so Copilot's actually it's ChatGPT is from a company called OpenAI, right? And they are partnered with Microsoft. So as OpenAI has been progressing with ChatGPT, Microsoft gets it by default, and they started layering it in quite a few years ago. You've kind of noticed how essentially like an Outlook and Word, and it's getting better at what it does. So those kinds of things. But now you start taking a look at the generative side, where it can create content and make suggestions, like Sue demonstrated. As soon as you're able to actually granted access, and it can look in a secure fashion at what you have for data sitting in things like SharePoint or OneDrive or these other different locations where company information and intellectual property and some of those other things reside, you'll be able to help people get what they need faster as it learns and gets better over time. But I know we've kind of touched on some of the caveats in general. Is it's only as good as what it's trained, and it's kind of a trust but verify type of mechanism in place, because it doesn't know necessarily good for bad. It's taking its best guess on what it thinks the intent of what you want and things are. So kind of proceed with caution is what the general consensus is. The other thing is this is rapidly changing. AI has been around for years, but the generative stuff is coming up on a year and a half in real common usage. I think Anna alluded to it, that it used to be difficult to get to. Now the barrier of entry is next to nothing. So, as it goes, it's going to get better. It's going to get different. It'll make some steps forward, some steps back. But one of the areas that I believe it touched on, but it's like it was trained on a bunch of copyrighted data. So the whole new next frontier legal battleground around intellectual property is just kind of starting to take shape now. So that's one of the things just to kind of be aware of. And then now stepping back to the non-work side, just like how easy it makes it to be able to do deep fakes and audio fakes and some of those kinds of things, where all of a sudden I could just be an AI saying this. It's not actually Chris. So, you kind of got to take it into context of saying, okay, what am I looking at? What are the risks of it? What's the appropriate usage of it? And, just make sure that you're well aware. One of the things is I don't believe there's any downside in education. I heard something, I think Anna said it is the learning together. That's what we're all going through. And it's just the pace of that has picked up now. So it's really fun. It's an exciting time to be alive. So I feel like that's, proceed with caution.
Thanks, Chris. I had a question on here, and it's probably a really ridiculous question because it's AI, right? But if you had to look into a crystal ball, where do you see it evolving in marketing and communications, or your world, in the next 3 to 5 years? That's probably a really hard question. But if you have some thoughts, I'd love to hear it from any of you, Anna, Sue, or Chris.
I've actually been giving this quite a bit of thought, and one of my big concerns is that we're going to have a lot of people who are using tools like ChatGPT to really elevate their writing skills and create a lot of content because they can. And just because we can doesn't mean we should. And so it's going to be harder for people to stand out with their legitimate copy because we're so overwhelmed with all of this stuff. So I don't know, that concerns me a little bit, but I think that's why we're the marketing and communication professionals who are going to think of those strategies and those ways to stand out in that sea. The other thing, I think we're going to continue to see the trend of AI being built more into programs rather than us using those standalone agents. Again, talked about those legal issues of, having to disclose if we're using AI or having built-in watermarks. I think that's something that definitely needs to happen. And just, I know Chris sent me an article earlier this week too, talking about how agents are going to be the next big thing. So you don't necessarily even go into a program to use AI. You go into an agent, you talk to an agent, which basically will do all the tasks needed to accomplish something, no matter what programs are needed to be, need to be used to accomplish that. And I mean, we've seen some examples where like AI could go and order a pizza, it generated the text, it could respond to the phone conversation. So it's going to be exciting. I think that we're definitely going to have our challenges. It's going to make automating some of those mundane tasks a lot easier, but we're going to have to spend that extra time working on strategies to stand out.
Thanks, Sue. Anna, did you have some things to add?
Yeah, I think that point about the content generation is going to be something that's really key that we have to work through. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with Buckminster Fuller. He was an architect and an American thinker, but he is the person, he came up with this theory of human knowledge doubling. And so in this theory, up until 1900, he said human knowledge and the content around that doubled about every century. By 1945, it was doubling every 25 years, so approximately every generation. By 1982, when he coined this theory, I wrote this down, it was doubling every year. By 2012, it was doubling every 12 months. And at that point, it was estimated that in 2020, human knowledge would be doubling every 12 hours. And so we're beyond that now, right? The amount of content that we sift through every day is tremendous. And so there are going to be questions about what it takes for your work to stand out, I think, exactly to Sue's point. And I think part of that, I listened to an interview with Stephen Marsh. Stephen Marsh is a former faculty member. He was a Shakespeare scholar. He wrote that article, The College Essay is Dead, back in December, that just kicked off a frenzy around this. Like, what does this mean? He was interviewed later and he recounted a conversation he had with his high school son, where his son said, well, I guess they're going to have to stop teaching us to write like machines and start teaching us to write like robot or like humans, right? And that cracked my heart open. I was suddenly like not so scared of all of this. Instead, what stands out is our ability to communicate better and to connect better, right? And we can do that with tools or without. I work with a lot of students that have kind of little t trauma experiences of writing. They are always told what's wrong with their writing. We almost never get feedback about what's great about what we're doing or what's great about our ideas. We get feedback that the commas are wrong. You can't start a sentence this way. I don't like when you do that, right? There's all of these stylistic preferences that get just loaded onto folks that are learning what their voice is. And I think actually there's a lot of potential with these tools to help people find their voice, right? To maybe break through some of those experiences they've had where they're like, I guess I'm just a bad writer, right? That fixed mindset. I can't do this. I'm never going to learn. I don't know what it means. And I think some of these tools actually will provide access opportunities if they're treated as tools, right, to help them find their voice. And we might actually find a future where the kind of content that stands out is the kind of content that's really authentic and genuinely connects. And that can happen again with or without these tools, but that might help kind of launch a future where those are the things that are really meaningful as our human connections. We see this in academia. They're like, well, maybe we're just going to have a metaversity, right? Everything's going to happen. And we're not going to have teachers. We're going to have AI teachers. And I think what we're seeing is actually the things that make educational opportunities stand out is how people connect around these, right? How people are connecting with one another around important issues. And I think that's going to hopefully be the future that we end up with, right? Where we value what folks are doing more than just how much of it is happening. So I think I agree. I think content is going to be a big thing. I do think though that there is a real big risk, and we haven't talked about it quite yet, and that's bias associated with this. There are a lot of human rights organizations. There are major concerns around its ethical treatment of people from different backgrounds, from different countries. You know, ChatGPT is banned in Egypt. This is not a universally accessible, globally accessible enterprise. And the risk of it becoming an inequity magnifier is significant. I mean, we see this happening with companies like Amazon, for example, had the hiring issue several years ago where it used AI to help filter out resumes. And what they found is that white men continued to be hired in that system at a much higher degree. And when they went and looked into their training data, it was because it was fed white male resumes over and over again. So things like women's colleges, if that's where they had graduated from, were took these applications down a notch, right? And so they got rid of that whole system. And so in order to do this, we have to bring an equity and inclusivity mindset to all of this. I think there are a lot of young people that are very concerned about their creative integrity, and they're very concerned about the potential for these things to be inequity magnifiers. There's a great book by Virginia Eubanks called Automating Inequality, and it looks at how these work all the time. So when we prioritize big data over small data, and small data in this case would be lived experiences, the interactions we have, how well we know who our client base is, right, or our students, whoever it is we serve, the better able we are to kind of mitigate that bias. And being critical, you know, the more we engage with this, the more critical we need to become around how we're using it.
Thank you, Anna. Chris, I will throw the same question to you if you have any final thoughts on this before we take questions.
Sure. And I think the overriding theme of the people I've talked to in a bunch of different industries are, on the positive side, it's going to make good people better, right? So like you can just take a look at the use case, and no matter what you feel, things like the NFL, NASCAR, and golf have gotten substantially more interesting now because of the technology layers that have, you know, grown exponentially in the last couple of years. So there's, you know, the good side is I feel like that same pattern will fit in nearly all aspects of, you know, what work shapes up to be over the next 5-10 years. But to echo Anna's thing, there is concerns with this. Large corporations trying to figure out who gets to control the AI for maximum profit is a very real risk, right? That's one of those things where everyone's kind of got to take a look at the underlying intent, make sure that we're operating, you know, from a place of responsibility. And then, you know, there's going to be certain open source or open efforts to say, like, what is the responsible way of stepping into this new generation that we're walking into? So educate yourself, pick one or two of those, and, you know, learn which ones you want to support. And I think that the group will be stronger than any individual company, and it just takes people to kind of stand up.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, we have about 15 minutes left, and so let's open up for questions. We have our panelists here, and if you want to raise your hand, and we can call on you, and just you can put forward a question to any of our panelists.
It looks like there's a question here in the chat too, which I think Anna kind of got to in her last discussion topic, but just to make sure, just to make sure we cover it.
I got to put my readers on.
I know, I got it. It's okay, Andrea. You don't need them. It's okay. I got this one. Anna, in the chat, one of our attendees commented that she was in a nail salon and heard a college student talk about how her brother had gotten a scholarship using AI. The student felt it was wrong, but said a lot of college students are using it to create papers, etc. It's maybe away from our roles as communicators, but as a human being, it's concerning. How are you training students about that balance specifically, and are they receptive to the ethical considerations?
Yeah, it's really hard. It's certainly one of my concerns too. What's interesting is that I have been trying really hard to recruit students to serve on panels, to have these conversations as part of, our institution, because right now it's faculty, administrators, staff that are really engaged in this conversation. We keep being like, we're not sure how students are using it. And I had a student respond and say, I would be happy to attend as a panelist. However, I would ask that you block my face and change my voice, like Dateline. And I was like, well, heavens no, we're not. Like, if you don't feel safe talking about this, we don't want to put you into situations where you're concerned. And I think this is a really significant issue in institutions of learning, where a knee-jerk reaction has been, this is cheating. And then we hear these cases, of course, you know, cheater's going to cheat, I guess. If folks are going to have someone else write their paper, they're going to copy and paste, you know, that has been a long history in education. In fact, some of our oldest educational texts are like, what is wrong with these kids? Why aren't they doing the work? Why don't they love it as much as I do, right? There's always been a kind of difference in how faculty feel about how much they love their field versus how students feel about having to take their English class. And so those extremes exist. And I've certainly heard stories of students, and I've heard students say, oh, I'm not going to write any more papers. There is a perception from a lot of students that they don't need to learn how to communicate, despite the institution saying over and over again, this is one of the top skills that employers need from a graduate, right? So I guess an ask for that, of helping carry the load, is to continue, when you are recruiting new employees, or if you're working with the institution, make sure that you're talking about how valuable it is that, you know, future graduates can navigate this space. They don't always hear it from us, even though we really, really push that this is the skill that y'all need. And so I think we're in a space of a lot of growing pains. I know there were students that were like, don't talk about it because I don't want people to know, right? And there were faculty that were like, don't talk about it, ban it. And neither of those solutions are going to help us with our ultimate goal. You know, good pedagogy isn't preventing plagiarism. It isn't preventing cheating. Good pedagogy is making sure that the things that we do in the classroom are supporting the learning and skills that our students need to be successful. And so that's the approach we've been taking in faculty development. I think we're going to see a few years where students are really trying to figure it out. We definitely see a lack of written communication skills. The pandemic made this much worse. Limited resources and institutions and classrooms make this harder. The higher the class size is, the less writing intensive opportunities students can engage with, the fewer opportunities they have for critical reading skills development. So we're seeing it's kind of a perfect storm of stuff. But the students that I work most closely with are very interested in this. They are really concerned about what this means for their future. They don't want to be replaced. They're worried about that techno dystopia future that they keep hearing about. They're creative, you know, they create a lot of content as well. I think when I first became aware of all of the YouTube and TikTok, just like generate content. And I had students tell me, that's what I want to do. This is what I want to do. And it took me a second to recognize that that's the same as people that want to publish and get their ideas out there, right? It's the same instinct to be sharing your ideas, but there's more attention to their process now. And I think they want that process recognized. And so I think there's lots of ways we can leverage opportunities for students to engage in this as critical citizens. I know at UND, faculty are working very hard to make this happen. We had 50 faculty go through that intensive summer workshop in 2 different cohorts, specifically because they know that this needs to be an awareness that students are developing in the classroom in guided opportunities to explore, rather than a kind of, you know, rogue, just go use it and turn in what it spits out. So I feel hope that this will engage students in really important, critical ways and create opportunities for them in their future. But I am very cognizant that on the ground, we're in a pinch point, for sure.
Thank you for that, Anna. Do we have any other questions? Questions or comments, I guess?
I guess one of the things that Anna just said too made me think about, you know, I do work a lot in proposals, and I'm worried that we're going to see the level of writing of our competition really improve. But I think that also puts more pressure on those verbal communication skills as well, because typically you submit a proposal and then you go for an interview, and if we submit this just awesome proposal and then we can't match that, those verbal skills with what the writing is like, there's going to be a real disconnect there. And so we really need to up our game on that as well.
Milo, I saw that you clicked on your camera. You have a lot of people there. Do you have any comments or questions?
I asked the room, nobody said that they had any. I would only say that, and maybe other people too, I'm just curious what other people use it for. I tend to use it for almost like an enhanced thesaurus. Like I want to say something and I'm writing something, I just can't quite figure out, you know, what I have is such a basic and it just doesn't sound right. So I'll be like, hey, I'm writing this. Can you come up with some other ways to say this? But I'm not asking for like a single word. I'm asking for some different phrasing or whatever. And it's depending again on how well you feed the information, you can get some really good stuff to kick back out again. And it's always like, why didn't I think of that? But that tends to be where I use it a lot, is to enhance that part of it, like help me figure out something that's getting stuck in my brain.
Andrew, I would say, this is Sarah Proud here in the room with Milo. One thing that kind of piques my interest is when you talked about the written policy that was established around it. That piques my interest just because it's becoming more and more of a conversation with our development officers, and they're dealing with a lot more privacy, donor intent, not utilizing names, but even for lead generation, for warm-ups, or, you know, just to be able to get in front of a donor or a friend of the university, of just getting that first meeting. So I'm curious, I don't know if you'd be willing to share kind of your policy process and how you came about that, but that's something that I'm really interested in from our development officers, because I know a lot of them are starting to use this just for, you know, email generation and whatnot, but we've had some conversations about, hey, don't put a donor's name in there. You know, there's certain things that you need to refrain from. And I think that would be really a good starting point for us from a development standpoint that we work with, even on the proposal side as well. So curious if you have,
Yeah, you know, our group, we, like Sue explained and Chris explained, we have an AI committee, and really our group sat down and said, you know, what is information that we produce that is our intellectual property? What is the information that is our clients' intellectual property? You know, and we just kind of went through those different categories of what we have and what we generate, and just even transmit between ourselves and clients. And it wasn't really a distinctive way of categorizing them, but we did in our group discussion really categorize those types of communications and what's acceptable and what's not. And for us, if it's already public information, you know, already on a website, already public information, somebody can just Google it and it pops up. We don't necessarily have a problem with putting it into some of those programs. But again, you know, is it already public? What's your intent with the content you're getting back? And, you know, kind of how are you using it? So we really did have to just go through all the different ways we get information, generate information, and its usage. And honestly, it just took a lot of discussions between our group, what was okay and what wasn't. And from there, that's where we were able to kind of frame those parameters, because too, it's a little bit different. We have our, you know, marketing and communications methods of how we may use it. Our engineers have different ways they may use the information. And then our business units, like how we run our business, finance, you know, HR, how they might use it. So that's why our group was made up of the CFO and legal and the different people representing the different kind of areas of interest in our firm. So it was a lot of talking, a lot of discussing, and then saying, look, we could talk about it till we're blue in the face. We just need to put some parameters around this now, realizing we're going to look at it probably every month and update it.
And
I don't know if
beyond
that helped or not.
And beyond just, what can we put out there and use AI for? We also have a whole clause about it has to be a draft. You have to review anything before it goes out there. Make sure that it's free of bias, that it represents our brand voice, kind of doing that sanity check. And then we've got another clause that's about the ethical use of it as well, not to use it for anything malicious or interfering with people's jobs or doing anything illegal. So
I'm dropping in the chat just an article. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with the incident that happened at Vanderbilt in the spring, I think in February, maybe. Vanderbilt responded to a shooting that had occurred in Michigan where 3 people died. Their equity and diversity inclusion office sent an email that was generated by ChatGPT, and at the bottom it said paraphrase from ChatGPT. So they embodied the principles of transparency around that. But the outcry around that, the pushback, the feeling of the community being deeply hurt by that choice is really evident. So this is coming from their student newspaper, this report that I put in there. It's got some of the community and student feedback around that. It's a very good example to bring into conversations that you're having in your unit or your groups around appropriate use of this and kind of thinking holistically about connecting as people. And then the last thing I'll say about like policy conversations too, it is worth thinking about your copywriting your own material. Right now, copyright law is things that are human generated. Copyright law will certainly have to adapt around these new technologies, but the UND Law School has several faculty members who are doing this work. And if you look through, they've published a bunch of stuff on it and they've led conversations, but there are questions about what is copyrightable if AI was used in it. And that is a very important conversation to have around things like intellectual property and company and institution products and outreach. So I would just add those to the policy conversation.
Absolutely. Good points, Anna.
This is Jamie Schumacher from Altru. Anna, that example you just shared, right away, it came back to me what that student had said, or the son of someone, about how they taught us to write like robots, but we need to write like humans. And I think that's interesting because what came up right away when I pulled up that link was a student writing, "There's a sick and twisted irony to making a computer write your message about community and togetherness because you can't be bothered to reflect on it yourself."
Yeah, talk about students' voice, huh?
Well, we are coming up on 1 o'clock here Central Time. Is there any last thoughts or questions? If not, I want to thank our panelists today, Anna, Chris, and Sue. Thank you for your insight and perspectives. They are very much appreciated. I'm sure this will be an ongoing conversation. If there's, there's a hand up. Jamie?
It was the applause part.
Oh, sorry.
See, it looks too much like it. There's a little action.
There we go.
Thank you so much for inviting us to speak. It was great meeting you too. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody.